Hello folks, welcome to this series of AWS. Till now we have used all our AWS resources using our web browsers. This method of accessing AWS resources is called web console method. So basically we've used this management console for everything, for EC2, for S3, everything, and we used to click on some buttons to create something and configure something. Now please remember that this is just one of the way of accessing your AWS resources. Web console method is good for learning AWS, but when you go to enterprises in organizations, you will be using other methods of managing your AWS resources as well. So today we'll explore that what are the other methods available for accessing AWS resources. So broadly we can say that there are three other methods of accessing AWS resources. First one is using command line interface. We call it AWS CLI tool. Another way is using software development kits. That is using APIs written in various languages for various services. Third one of creating and modifying your AWS resources is using Cloudformation templates. In this video today we will quickly go through all these other options that are available. So let's start with AWS CLI. So AWS CLI is basically a tool provided by AWS where you can just write the commands and create any AWS resource. For example, you have to launch an EC2 instance, you would have to write AWS service name, which is EC2, and then run instances, and then various options which will define the configuration of the instance. We'll explore AWS CLI in more detail in the next video. So the benefit is you can install AWS CLI tool on any machine, even on your workstation, and configure it to connect it to your AWS account, and you are good to go and work with AWS resources there. So create resources, modify them, delete services, all those things would be the command. So there are so many commands available for each of the AWS service. So that is one way of accessing your AWS resources. Another way is AWS SDK. So software development kits have been made available by AWS, which will mostly be used by programmers. So suppose you are an AWS developer, you want to create an application, and that application would be using the AWS resources or maybe even launching AWS resources. So for example, in your application you want to use a queue. Now AWS provides you simple queuing service. So you can use the queues which are created in AWS and use it through APIs. Whatever language you may be using, support for multiple languages. We can see the languages that it supports as of now. So SDKs, software development kits, are available for Java, .NET, Node.js, PHP, Python, Ruby, Go, C++, etc. If you are a developer, then if you use these languages, the APIs are already there. You just need to import the libraries and start using those built-in functions. So to show you an example, we can go to the Python, and in Python there is a Boto3 library that has been created for accessing AWS resources. So if we click on documentation, you will go to this boto3.readthedocs.io, and from here you can see that how to install the Boto3 library, how to import it, and how to configure it, and then some examples has been given here. So suppose you are using a queue. So let's go on and see one of these examples. Here you go. So if you want to create a queue in Python, you first need to import that Boto3 library, and then you will be able to use the methods or functions available in Boto3 library. So this is basically how you will write the code to create a queue using SQS service. Of course, a lot of things will go into background. For example, the application has to be connected to AWS. There should be a proper permission associated to that application and a server to make it able to access AWS resources. So authentication and authorization of the application is one part. But having said that, I just want to show you that this is also how you can create resources, you can access resources, and you can work with AWS resources using a plain programming language. So this is how developers would be creating cloud native application on your AWS. So CLI was one way, SDK was another way to communicate to the AWS account and work with the resources. Now another way to create and modify resources in AWS is using templates. So AWS provides you a service called Cloudformation. You can find it under management tools. Here you go. So using Cloudformation service, you can write the configuration of the AWS resources that you want to create in a template file. Now these templates are normally written in JSON syntax. You can also use YAML, by the way, which is another markup language. So you can use JSON or you can use YAML. So by using those templates, you can create multiple resources at the same time and these resources could be interrelated to each other. Now we will cover Cloudformation service in a separate video, but for now you understand that this is also another way of creating your resources. So for example, you want to launch an EC2 instance, you want to also have an auto scaling group, and you want to connect through load balancer, and all these resources you want to create in a single go. So you can create a template file and write all the configuration in proper format, proper JSON syntax or YAML syntax, and then use this Cloudformation service to launch that template file, and it will in turn create all the AWS resources, whatever is written in that template file. So for example, this is one of the template files where all these things are defined. Parameter section is there, then you have got resources sections. So here basically this template file is creating EC2 instance and instance security group, and you have to give all the configuration under this in JSON syntax. These resources would be created and finally these outputs would be displayed. Now we'll go into details of these templates and the Cloudformation service in a separate video, but we want to show you here that this is basically what we also call infrastructure as a code concept. So you are writing all the configuration of your infrastructure that you want to create in a file, and just by launching this file using Cloudformation tool, you will be able to create all the resources. And if you think about it, this file is now reusable. So if something bad happens, or you suppose you want to modify this, you can just modify in the template. Just specify what change you need and you can launch it again, or you can modify your stack with this new template file. So this is very good and automated way of creating your resources. You don't need them to go and launch EC2 instances individually and configure them manually. You can do all those things in a written format, so these files can be reviewed from your peers, and if there is any problem, that can be detected in advance. So conclude this video, we have got multiple ways to access AWS resources. We have been using Web Console and will keep on using Web Console for most of the learning purposes. Web Console basically gives you a web user interface which is quite good for learning. But having said that, in the enterprises, based on what is your role, suppose if you are using for infrastructure management, you might go and prefer the command line interface. For creating technology stack, you might go and use Cloudformation tool. And to create an application and using this AWS resource, you can use the SDKs, software development kits, that are made available by AWS. So that would be mostly domain of the developers on AWS. So now since we know about all these various methods of accessing AWS resource, keep all these things in mind. In the next video, we are going to see how to access resources using AWS command line interface. We'll configure it, we'll connect it, and we will use it. So see you soon in the next video. Thank you for watching.